Welcome to Unforbidden Truth. I'm Andrew. Today I'll be speaking with convicted serial killer Prentiss PJ Williams. In the summer of 1994, when PJ was just 15 years old, two murders occurred in Toledo, Ohio. The first victim, Robert Hendricks, was killed earlier that year under circumstances that remain largely undisclosed. However, it was later revealed that PJ feared Hendricks' death would be reported. Later that same summer, Shelley Johnson was found shot to death inside a Ford Bronco in central Toledo. Prosecutors eventually determined that PJ had murdered Johnson because she intended to inform police about Hendricks' killing. Due to his age at the time, the Johnson case initially proceeded in juvenile court, and authorities lacked sufficient evidence to charge him for either murder. Nearly a decade later, around 2002 to 2003, PJ was arrested for two additional murders, the fatal shootings of Carmita Dickey and Jonathan Booker. While incarcerated for these charges in 2003, PJ obtained a firearm that had been smuggled into the jail by a counselor. He discharged the weapon inside the jail, though nobody was harmed. The incident led to an internal investigation, during which PJ confessed to the 1994 murder of Shelley Johnson, finally linking him to that long unsolved case. Following this confession, prosecutors transferred the Johnson case from juvenile to adult court. PJ ultimately pleaded guilty to 4 murders, those of Robert Hendricks, Shelley Johnson, Carmita Dickey, and Jonathan Booker. These included aggravated murder, assault, attempted aggravated murder, escape, possessing a weapon while under disability, and having a deadly weapon in a detention facility. In exchange for his guilty plea, prosecutors opted not to pursue the death penalty. Instead, PJ was sentenced to 151 years in prison. As of right now, PJ is incarcerated at Warren Correctional Institution. His official sentence began on December 22, 2003, and includes life terms for murder, aggravated murder, along with additional consecutive sentences for other felonies. According to the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, PJ will not be eligible for parole until October 30th, 2148, effectively ensuring that he will spend the rest of his life in prison. Here's my interview with convicted serial killer Prentiss PJ Williams.
Hello. This is a prepaid debit call from
PJ.
an inmate at the Trumbull Correctional Institution.
Okay, so my name is Prentiss PJ Williams, and my birthplace is Toledo, Ohio.
Okay, so can you recall any positive memories that stick out to you from your childhood?
From my childhood?
Yeah.
A positive memory? Yeah. So I had a short period of time where, I lived in quite a few different foster homes, right? But it was some of them were less positive experiences, less positive influences in my development, because you got a lot of people who do it not so much as to help people, but for the money or whatever, right? And I ran into quite a few of those. But for probably 3 years, man, as long as I stayed in any one placement, I stayed with a family who went by the last name of the Odoms. They were originally from Louisiana, an older Christian couple, man, and they had a real structured family, real solid, community type of environment, type of family in general, right? And that was the most closest I came to normalcy. Them and one other family, but a family by the name of the Chandlers, right? But when I was living with the Odoms, man, I experienced, Christmas, normal holiday settings and things of that nature, man. And so I derive a lot of positive influence just from living with them in general, including, the foundation of my faith, in Christ. So, yeah.
Well, that's good. That's good. At least you had some positive memories as a child. So it sounds like you had more negative than positive memories then, from what you were saying then, right?
Yeah, extremely negative. Yeah, most definitely.
Okay, so can you pick out a couple of negative memories that stick out to you more than others from your childhood that has like maybe impacted you more than anything else in your life?
One was when I was between the ages of 5 and 8, seeing my mother, my grandmother. I was in the backseat of my grandmother's car. My mother abandoned me when I was 3 weeks old. She was a prostitute, amongst other things, right? And it was a few occasions where I would be in the backseat of my grandmother's car. That's why I, had constant, temporary custody of me, right? She'd have me, but then she'd give me up, then she'd have me again or whatever, right? But one time she had pointed out my mother on what's called the hoe stroll, where on the street in Toledo where a lot of prostitutes at the time, posted up or, seeking, soliciting, customers, I guess you would say, whatever, right? One specific time, man, my grandmother was upset with both me and my mother. What I did, I'm not for sure besides, looking like her a lot or whatever, right? But she went out of her way to make sure that she showed her to me, but then also explained to me, in my young mind, right, what it was that she was doing, what she was into or whatever, right? And, that left a hurtful, lasting impression on me, man. And then another experience was my grandmother trying to drown me the night before, or 2 nights before she gave me up to Children's Services permanently. She had woke me up in the middle of the night, man, and led me to a tub, of cold water, right, and had me sit in it. And I just pretty much volunteered with it, being a child, not knowing what was going on or whatever, right. And she had me lean back and she pushed me under the water and held me under there for a while. That left a lasting impression, man. One that messed with my sleep for a few years, man. And all of them was pretty much centered around my grandmother. Another one was I had made a mistake and let somebody in one night. Somebody knocked on the door. She was asleep on the couch, and I let somebody in, and they assaulted her. Actually, this was the event leading to her, putting me in the tub, whatever. Somebody came in and had robbed and assaulted her, right, and it had in front of me, right, and it left a very negative, lasting impression on me. They physically sexually assaulted her, as well as stabbed her, right, and it left a very lasting, impression, on me or whatever. In terms of, what it was explained to me later that this is pretty much what was in the world. You had to be on guard against the world. That it was cruel and full of people with foul intent and things of that nature, whatever. And I was living in the atmosphere of that, so it kind of confirmed it or whatever. So it set the tone in terms of the quality of the experiences I expected, and things of that nature. So I have quite a few, so them are standout experiences within themselves, though.
Okay, all right. So I can kind of skip my next question, which was, were your parents together throughout your childhood? It doesn't sound like it. Did you know your father growing up at all?
No, I just knew of different names. Nope, not at all. Never to this day, man, for sure about who that person is.
All right. So you partly answered this question already, which was, did you suffer any childhood abuse or trauma growing up? Did you suffer any other type of childhood abuse or trauma other than what you spoke about already?
Yeah, I pretty much suffered every abuse you can. My grandmother used to sexually abuse me, as well as a few other relatives. I used to get treated. One of my punishments was not being fed sometimes, days on end. And I definitely got beat, quite often, sometimes, for things that weren't even, equal to, the consequence, right? It was a lot of pain, a lot of, dysfunction, and, a lot of it, was directed towards me, man, despite my being, but a child or whatever. So, yeah, I've experienced pretty much every form of abuse that you can, especially, mental and emotional, because, I was told a lot of things, man, that affected my sense of value and sense of worth, man, which ultimately affected, a lot of the things that, or inspired me to do a lot of things that I would go on to do later on in the streets and, ultimately lead me to prison. So, yeah.
Mm. So did you have any type of hobbies growing up?
So I love fishing. And I loved just being out in nature in general, man. I never really took to sports. At least I did when I was a child. Fishing and reading. I developed appreciation for reading very young, but fishing and, catching frogs and snakes and things of that nature, just being out in nature, that was my thing, being alone. I had a lot of time to spend alone, right, because I didn't really grow up around a lot of kids my age, at least those first 8 years of my life when I was off and on with my grandmother. And so, I just like to get out there and, kind of explore on my own. I was afforded space to do that, so. And in my older years, as I would, went through the ages or whatever, fishing stayed a primary interest of mine, so.
So I know you mentioned that you lived with your grandmother for a little bit, then you were in foster homes, right? So what was your behavior like growing up, both with your grandmother and then in foster homes? Like, how did you act?
So at first I was extremely quiet, so much so that it was believed that something was wrong with me. I kind of just went with the flow, and when I was living with my grandmother, I bounced between her, various other relatives when she couldn't afford it or whatever, or when she was between houses. Because this was your typical grandmother. Wasn't no baking, no cookies, and no loving setting, as you probably already can imagine, whatever, right? She was very, I guess you could say, irresponsible. She didn't have a lot of her priorities intact, so we moved around a lot. And as a result, I would have to be bounced between different relatives who, and then I would ultimately end up in an emergency foster home, and then would be eventually placed back with her. So while I was living with her, it was pretty much go with the flow. I fought a lot, right? When we was living in we stayed in the projects for maybe 2 years. Last 2 years of my living with her, I got into a lot of, physical altercations, even though I was young or whatever. But when I eventually was placed in foster care, right, it took the fighting and the disruptions took to a whole nother level. One of the things looking back that I can identify as, being part of that process was like when I lived with the Odoms. I moved in with them, pretty much right after leaving my grandmother. I was placed in an emergency foster home for like 30 or 45 days, then I moved in with the Odoms. And like I said, it was a very structured family. They believed in genuine, Christian values and principles. I was 8 when I moved with them. They were already in their 50s, so it was already, some differences in, culture and things of that nature. Plus, they was from somewhere else or whatever, right? But at the same time, even though I was in what would be considered a normal setting, a healthy setting, it was new to me. It was unfamiliar to me. So I rebelled a lot. But a lot of my rebellion, though, was had to do with a lot of the unchecked trauma that was in me. Because what I noticed is that I was just placed with them. My past wasn't addressed. I had issues with going to sleep. As a result of some of the things I experienced. My value system, like I appreciated the smell of weed and sipping alcohol and things of that nature, things that I was exposed to as a child. That living with them, it wasn't even a part of the the household, wasn't a part of the culture living with them, right? And so I rebelled, for those reasons within themselves, but also more importantly though, or more so, I rebelled because I didn't really understand a lot of things, right, that I was going through, nor that was going on within me. Like for example, I was living with them, and I would often see relatives, my biological relatives, and that would confuse me going back to live with these people who, even though they was loving and things of that nature, right? I didn't know how to identify, like, what am I doing? Am I doing something wrong by living with them? And so just a lot of confusion, a lot of inner conflicting issues, consequently saw me being disrupted in school and ultimately in the household and things of that nature. Even though in my heart of hearts I respected them, loved and appreciated them, right? I just had a lot of, inner issues I didn't know how to express. A lot of, pain that, it didn't just go away just because you took me from one household and dropped me off in another, right? As it was seemingly expected. It was seemingly expected to go like that, right? It just didn't go like that or whatever, right? But yeah, I was very disruptive in terms of, school and, getting to a lot of fights and things of that nature.
So what was your behavior like in school, more so your middle school years? Maybe you went to high school, right? So you caught your case at 15, right? I think the last grade I successfully completed, I'm not even sure if it was the fifth. I want to say it was the sixth, but I started going to juvenile jail facilities at the age of 12. So from 12 to 16, when I got bounced over and tried as an adult and sent to prison, I think I had maybe 30 days in junior high and exactly 2 days in high school. And I was only passed on to those grades because I participated in school. I had 5 juvenile incarcerations. 4 of them
6-month bids, and
You have 1 minute remaining.
one of them was a 90-day incarceration, right? So I was just passed on, and, you know, for the few times I come home and I just be placed in a grade or whatever, right? So I don't really have any, besides, like I say, a few weeks, you know, experience in high school and junior high together.
So that brings me to my next question is, did you engage in any criminal activity prior to the 2 homicides at the age of 15, which it sounds like you did? So can you talk about the criminal activity you engaged in starting as early as possible?
Okay, so my earliest actual conscious criminal activity, I would have to say I was 11 or 12. I think I was, excuse me. Matter of fact, I was 11. No, matter of fact, I was 10 when I got initiated to, I had became a gang member around just before my 11th birthday. And the first thing I did, I shot at a man, right? My initiation was by the gun. After that, it was, I had to be late 11, early, somewhere around the age between 11 and 12. I started selling crack cocaine. You know, I fell in with a group of guys who were pretty much 2, some 3 times older than me. And by then, the crack cocaine epidemic was really finding its way through the Midwest, including Toledo and stuff. And the guys that I was living with, they was, genuine. They were actually, in depth in the streets, right? They was really, of that lifestyle, right? And I got influenced by them to, sell drugs and things of that nature. I had to, I was a runaway. By this time, I was running away from, every foster home that I was placed in. Some of them, the same day I got there, right? And my family setting, it wasn't real, for me, at least towards me, it wasn't a lot of community in terms of, being open and welcoming arms and things of that nature. So I always had to go to the streets and pretty much fend for myself. And so I did a lot of, as a result of moving around in different foster homes in different parts of the city and things of that nature, I was introduced to, different sections of individuals, if you will, right? And so I moved around a lot, taking, turns in one dope house to another, selling drugs to provide for myself, underwear, hygiene, food, things of that nature. And I caught my first incarceration at the age of 12. I had ran away from a group home, and it was in the suburbs of Toledo. And to get away, I had stole the group home's van, and that consequently saw me being charged with a grand theft auto. Yep, and I went to the streets. I was out there for a couple months, man. It got pretty extreme, man. And just being around them older fellas, man, and just being caught up in that lifestyle, right? And I was hoping by this time that one of the foster homes would accept me back after I had got a whiff of how real it could get, out there or whatever, right? And so I turned myself in to Children's Services, and when they didn't communicate to me that I actually had a warrant. In fact, the caseworker who picked me up didn't even know that I had a warrant. So she picked me up and took me back to the group home, who then turned me over to the local authorities, and I was charged with grand theft auto and sentenced to 6 months in juvenile youth system. And
was that the extent of your criminal activity before the 2 homicides at 15?
So I got out. I did 6 months. I got out and immediately ran away from the foster home I was placed in, because by this time, I think since I was 8 or 9, Children's Services had permanent custody of me. So every time I would get out, I would have to be placed in the foster home, So I got out, and after I did that first 6 months, I was out maybe 2 days. I stayed with the foster home, the foster family that I was assigned to, maybe 2 days, and I ran away and went right back to the same group of fellas that I initially, the older guys I fell in with before before I caught my time, whatever, right? And while I was with them, I was out maybe 2 months at the most, and I caught a drug trafficking charge. Was given another 6 months, and went in for that. So around this time, I'm also getting deeper into the gang banging, right? Getting to more expressive into the gang life, right? And so I did the second 6 months, and I got out, and I tried staying with this foster parent that I was assigned to, which was the daughter of one of those families who, like the Odoms, it was more normal, it was more, family setting. It was more, I liked them, right? But by this time, so going back to my childhood, one thing people don't understand about individuals who come from, that type of background, right, especially when, being exposed to those type of things so young, that dysfunction and whatever, right? My sense of value, not only my sense of value, but my values in general were linked to those founding years of my life. My grandmother and her boyfriend most especially, was an individual attached to the street life. So this was something that I was normally introduced to, right, in my household, right? And I was told everything as a child from that, the world don't care about me because I'm black, and, that I was going to have to grow up fighting and fending for myself, right? I was told these things as a child, and this is what I went to bed with, my divisions I entertained, how I was going to do this, how it was going to play out and things of that nature, where I could have been and should have been imagining or dreaming about, being a sports athlete or whatever, right, what have you, right? So while I was leaving these foster homes and I was going out there to them streets trying to find what I was told as a child was my value and worth, what I only knew to identify because that's the only reference that I had, right? And so I kept running away from the foster homes, and I kept getting locked back up, man. And, the first time it was Grand Theft Auto. The second time it was for drug trafficking. After that, I started getting more expressive into the gang life, and so it became, I think I got the third time was I think it had to do with a gun, right? It had to do with possession of a firearm, because now I started shooting young. I started, shooting and wounding. My ride was young, right? That's what I was. I was around a lot of older guys, man. A lot of harder mentalities, right? Some actually from California, where gang life initiated, right? Originates, right? And so I had all this pain in me, and that gave me an outlet to express it, right? Self-hate and things of that nature, right? So I started catching cases that reflected that, around the time I was 13 and 14. And so by the time I was 15, is when I caught those first two murders, man, when I was, as I guess it's best to say, all the way out there, And of course drugs played a major part, drugs and alcohol played a major role in, much of what I was doing and how I was seeing things and going about them as well, so.
Before we talk about the two homicides that you committed at age 15, I just want to confirm, was it Shelley Johnson and Robert Hendricks then?
Yeah, Robert Hendricks and then Shelley. Yep.
Okay, all right. Okay, I just wanted to double check. All right. Let's talk about the two homicides you committed as a juvenile. Can you walk me through what led up to the homicides of Shelley Johnson and Robert Hendricks at the age of 15?
Okay. So I went to juvenile prison around. I did another 6 months, right? And this was my fourth juvenile incarceration. And I was already at a point in my life where I was tired of, going through a repeat of what I was going through, getting out, getting locked back up, and going back to what I was going through. So just to be direct, my desperation, level was at a high, right? But I didn't know really how to manage. I didn't even know how to identify it. But I just knew that I wanted more, right? And I just didn't know how to go about getting it. I was told from the street perspective that, having a certain mentality, a certain set of values, and, being willing to do certain things, would afford me a better living or whatever, right? So I was sort of ready to do whatever, so to speak, right? And so when I went home in April of 2002, well, when I got out, not April 2002, excuse me, April of 1994, this is the disposition I had. I was tired of foster homes and things of that nature. So the same day I got out, I again ran for my foster home, right, my assigned foster home. And so I went back to selling dope, and I was already had a name by this time with the gangs, all that or whatever, right? And so everything was pretty much the same as it had been, as far as selling dope and doing what I had to provide for myself. But I had things going on. I had a storm of emotions, things that going on within me that even to this day it's kind of hard to put words to, whatever, right? But on the specific day of the murder of Robert Hendricks, I was hungry, literally, right? It was a drug house that I had frequented since like 1992. That's where the incident happened at, right? It took place at, right? And it was in a rival's neighborhood. And I was already going through, I had some conflicting incidents, run-ins with them that had me, pretty much not caring about, coming back to the environment, and, anymore anyway, right? But I still did periodically, right? I slide in when I noticed that they wasn't around or whatever, try to make a few sales or whatever. This particular night, I didn't even have any drugs, right? I didn't have $1 to my name, and I probably hadn't eaten for 2 days. And sometimes I would go to the crack house and I would find individuals that I knew in common there, fellow gang members and things of that nature, whatever, right? This particular night wasn't nobody there, right? No, none of them were there. It was just, drug users, right? And Mr. Hendricks was one of them. And I was told that he had a decent sum of money on him from having cashed a check earlier that day. Now, prior to this, I hadn't robbed anybody, Robbery wasn't my thing or whatever. Stealing never really was my thing or whatever, right? But it was a robbery attempt. Like I said, I was extremely hungry. That don't justify it or nothing, but this is what at the time, ultimately led to me making the decision. That and a part of me, borderline not caring anymore, right? And so I attempted to rob him, man, and he in the first moments of the robbery attempt, right? He stood his ground, he relented, right? I mean, he didn't relent, excuse me. And I shot him, as so I shot him for that reason, whatever, right? And the people who saw me, the people who ran that crack house, they saw me and they initially told on me, whatever, right? So I was given a warrant for my arrest pretty much within days of that incident. At the time, I was off and on living with Shelley, Miss Johnson, man, and we had like a mother-son type of relationship, right? Then it, became sexual, things of that nature. She was a very loving person to me, man, very welcoming person to me, right? But after maybe 6 months of being on the run for that murder of Mr. Hendricks, as well as being engaged in quite a few shootouts, shootings that wounded people and things of that nature, and having just pressure on me in general for being in that reality, in that situation, I started seeing things that sometimes weren't there. And I don't mean visually seeing things. I'm talking about mentally analyzing things because, I'm on a run. People know who I am. People know I'm on a run. And, different things were going on or whatever. And you had people, I had enemies, genuinely looking to kill me and things of that nature. I was still but 15, right? So that was a lot of pressure on me, man. And it was brought to my attention that just after, quite a few months of being out there, living in that pressure, right, living in that reality, it was brought to my attention that Shelley may have been trying to call Crime Stopper on me to get the reward to turn me in. Part was because I was doing so much that her intent may have been to help me, right? But then the other part was that it may have been, because she had started, abusing drugs as well by this time. So the other part was that she may be trying to get the reward, to, satisfy her own drug habit, her interest, right? And so, like I say, man, I was in the zone where, it's hard to even explain, man, but ultimately what I end up doing is I end up killing her because, I thought that would, keep me free. I thought I was protecting myself, despite the fact this was somebody I loved or whatever, right? The code of the streets was, so-called code of the streets, negated, emotions and things of that nature. It was about do unto others before they do you, and, those type of things or whatever, right? And taking those things literal, I ultimately, murdered somebody I love, man, thinking I was protecting myself, so that's what those incidents were about.
Okay, so what followed the two homicides?
So I was on the run for the Mr. Hendricks murder for probably, I think, between 4 and 6 months. I was actually charged with that. I think I had attempted murder and a felonious assault along with it. I actually got caught at the scene of Shelley's murder, but I wasn't charged with it. When I got caught for Mr. Hendricks' murder, due to a lack of evidence, it was ultimately dropped, dismissed, right? And I didn't get charged with it again until I was in the county jail in 2002. Jailhouse informant had made a deal with the prosecution to testify on me for those two as well as 2 other murders. And so that's when I was eventually recharged with Mr. Hendricks' murder. And then, matter of fact, I wasn't even charged with Shelley's murder then. I was just charged with Mr. Hendricks' murder. And I eventually pled guilty to Shelley's murder in a plea to free some people, if I remember correctly. And hers came later.
So what was your total sentence then as a juvenile? Like, what were you sentenced to?
As a juvenile, so when I got caught, so the Mr. Hendricks murder got dropped, but I got caught with a Tech 9 and a semi-automatic pistol, and so I immediately pled guilty to that, and I received another 6 months. That was my last juvenile, my final juvenile, my stay in juvenile in the juvenile system. When I was ultimately, I did 6 months, and I got out after that. And within weeks, man, within days actually, I had caught a gang-related shooting, and was caught for that, and was bounced over to the adult system and was tried as an adult on the felonious assault charge. And was given a sentence of 6 to 15 years. And that's when I ended up doing 6 years and 9 months on that. So
just on a random shooting.
Yeah, but random gang shooting. It was targeted, but random. Yeah, I guess.
So you were saying that you got more time for the gang-related shooting, that nobody passed away, and then for the murder, correct?
Oh, so the murder actually got dropped.
The murder got dropped. Okay. I was confused because you said like 6 months here, 6 months there, and then 6 to 18.
Right,
I was kind of no, it's okay.
It's probably how I'm explaining it too, because it's something to talk about. It's doing its own little thing to me inwardly or whatever. But I had ultimately got caught when I got caught for the Robert Hendricks murder. It ended up getting dropped due to a lack of evidence, but I had got caught with a gun, and so on the gun charge I did 6 months. But then when I got out from doing the 6 months, man, within a few weeks I had caught the gang-related shooting, and that led to me going to being tried as an adult and sent to adult prison.
Okay, so you went to prison as a juvenile.
Yeah.
How long did you end up doing off that sentence?
6 years and 9 months.
6 years and 9 months. Okay. So when you got out of prison, did you engage in any criminal activity prior to the 2 homicides you would be later convicted of?
Yeah, I mean, immediately, man. The day I got out of prison, I was homeless, right? And I didn't know anything about a lot of the programs and incentives they have now for individuals, options they have for individuals fresh released out of prison, right? So I went in as a ward of the state, right, as a foster child, a homeless foster child, right? And so now here it is, my first time in the world as a grown man, don't have any family that's, living as family, right? And I didn't have a home placement, right? So I was just released to the streets day one, man. And I get back home and I got this extreme reputation, and I got enemies, and then I got needs, right? I don't have anywhere to stay. I need clothes, I need food, and and the only thing I knew was that I thought I knew was the streets. And so I got right back off into everything, day one. The first day I had a pistol, so I was carrying a concealed weapon. Within the first few days, I was selling, drugs and marijuana, you know what I mean? So within weeks, I was, shooting, 30th day, I had 2 more murders.
And what, I don't know if you said it or not yet, but what gang were you a part of?
Crips. I was a Crip.
Okay, of the Crips, okay. So can you walk me through the murders of Carmita Dickey and Jonathan Booker?
Yeah, so I had, in desperation, man, I had, when you're desperate, you consider different options that you probably wouldn't be normal in other settings or other circumstances or whatever, right? And one of the options I had considered was murder for hire. And I was paid to murder someone who was allegedly an associate of Carmita Dickey's. And Jonathan Booker, in the initial stages, was my will-be co-defendant. Because of my reputation, I can't just go out there looking for people and then something happens to me, everybody knows me, because by this time, my reputation was that of a man who used his pistol, right? So I used Mr. Booker to lure who I thought was my targets to a disclosed location. And when they arrived, I wounded my last target, and in the process, Miss Dickey was she lost her life. She was shot and killed, right? And so initially after that, Mr. Booker was the initial suspect. My name wasn't even associated with the incident, and it was brought to my attention that he had reached out to the authorities to make some type of deal with him or whatever, right, to turn himself in and potentially, speak about who was with him, right? And so before he could, that same evening, I shot and killed him, to prevent him from, I didn't know he had already, given the authorities my name, right? But my intent was to safeguard my identity, right?
Okay, so what about Carmita Dickey?
Oh, so like I said, I shot the I had Mr. Booker call the alleged victim, the alleged person I was paid to target. I had him call him and set up a meeting at a disclosed location, right? And she was the passenger in the car with the man that I was paid to murder, right? And as I was shooting at him, she was also shot and wounded, but she died. He survived. And like I said, Mr. Booker's name was on the news, immediately following that incident, right? And to, like I say, safeguard my identity, I shot and killed Mr. Booker later that evening.
Okay. So we're all four. Well, all 4 of these, including the 2 as a juvenile, were all 4 of these gang related?
No. I would like to say they were desperation related more than anything. Even my gang related incidents, revolve around, my desperation to carve out, an identity and a living for myself with a little bit of information that I was given, right? So they were me, as a kid, as a, a dysfunctional, ignorant young person, right? Trying to make his way in the life and in the world where, I had to fend and raise myself, man. Fend for and raise myself since my beginning, right? So, they was desperation related more than anything.
Do you have remorse for any of the homicides?
I have, yeah, most definitely. So I'm thankful for who I've grown to become, right? Because I have a platform through which I can reach others that's living that life where they think that lifestyle is ideal. However, I totally dislike the fact that I've done the things and went through the things that I have done and went through to learn what I know, right? So I definitely have remorse of having to have learned my humanity, right, as a result of compromising at first, right? So I definitely, especially having perpetuated in lives, other lives, what I went through, it's children who had to, individuals who had to raise themselves without parents as a result of my consequences, right? And that was something that I know firsthand, all too well, what it could feel and look like, right? And to know that I've contributed to that, when that wasn't my intent, right? It's something that I've had to think about over the years quite often and sort of reconcile myself with. But yeah, definitely, I have remorse.
So how long after the fourth homicide were you arrested?
Within 30 days, 40 days, something like that.
Oh, okay. So what were you doing in the meantime, other than just laying low? Obviously, like what were you doing? Were you like committing other shootings, or were you just trying to lay low the whole time?
No. Just mainly laying low, man. I had just did 6 years and 9 months of my life, right? And like I said, this was the first time I was out in the world as an adult, and so I was sort of laying low, but I was still trying to explore too. Like I was, in clubs and bars, and I was doing it's street stuff, but at the same time, I was trying to get a little bit of life in too. You know what I mean? I was going to restaurants and the malls and trying to see some of the moving world that I hadn't seen in quite a while, or whatever, right? While also bracing for the impact of knowing that I was more than likely going to be put in a situation where it was going to be a long time before I could experience or see those things again. So, yeah, I wasn't doing anything else, though, besides that. And probably a little bit of hustling, man, to, pay my bills, man, and pay for, food and things of that nature. But, I ain't having any more shootings.
Were you afraid of getting the death penalty upon getting arrested, or were you afraid of being shot at by the police upon them getting in contact with you?
I can't really say I was. The death penalty hit different, right? I was concerned about it. It affected my sleep, right? I was highly depressed because there was a lot of other things I was dealing with while I was, going through the motions of preparing for, trial with two, looming death penalty sentences, right? So it did have an impact on me, most definitely, man. But at the same time, at that period and point in time in my life, man, I was basically living out a self-fulfilled prophecy. I was told that my life will ultimately see the things that it saw, that I was going to ultimately go through those things. So while a part of my humanity was like, wow, you know what I mean? Another part was like, damn, this is what they told us we was going to, have to go through, see and feel. It was a motherfucker feeling it. You know what I mean? It was extremely, soul-wrenching, right? But at the same time, I accepted, I think, a long time ago that I was going to experience the things that I experienced. You know what I mean? I tried to fight back, but I understood at some point that my methods of fighting back weren't exactly the most ideal, right? Definitely wasn't the most humane, but it was what I had. You know what I mean? It's what I was told since a child, that I had, fight. You know what I mean? And so, the life was definitely exposing, a multitude of contradictions, you know what I mean?
So after you were arrested and charged with the two homicides, were you offered any plea deals before going to trial?
No, I wasn't offered any deals. They was, by this time, the detectives and prosecution in Toledo, Ohio, man, had a dedicated interest to either see me on death row or see me in prison for life, so they weren't offering any deals. They was offering deals to other people. There's other people they let out of prison, they let murderers out of prison, rapists out of prison, to become witnesses against me, but they weren't offering me no deals.
So you went to trial then and you were sentenced to 151 years in prison, is that right?
No, I actually didn't make it to trial. They weren't trying to give me a plea. I had an escape attempt in my county jail. I had a gun smoking in my county jail, and
guns?
Wound up shooting out. Yeah, yup. And that was how to measure that desperation, right? But it ultimately led to them, the prosecutor one of the prosecutors at the time, sort of having no choice but to give me a deal just to kind of get that out of the line, like get that incident out the news, because as I would later learn, that quite a few people was embarrassed by that particular deed and act. So that's what got me the deal to plead to the 151 years. That and to assure that other individuals associated with the county jail incident, as well as somebody that was wrongly being implicated in one of the murders, to assure that they didn't get charged with anything. I pled guilty to everything, admitted to everything, said why I did and what I did, why I did it and what I did, and took the 151-year plea to avoid, others being incarcerated.
So, do you remember how you reacted emotionally when you were sentenced to that 151 years in prison?
Man, it was torture for a while, right? But I didn't wallow in it long, man. God is a very ultimate and real God. Mine is, right? And I knew from the beginning, man, that I was gonna be all right. That I was gonna endure much because I was sent straight to supermax isolation. There was a president at the time, President Harvey said at the time, whatever, right? But I committed to believing that I was gonna be all right, because even though I had committed wrongs against people, I didn't commit wrongs in terms of my intention to take my life into my own hands and to show up and to guard my life and to provide for my life and to express it the best way I knew how. So I didn't feel the full extent of the guilt that many probably wanted me to feel.
Did you get to address any of your victims' families in court?
Yeah, I addressed each family.
Do you remember, or like paraphrasing, do you remember what you said to any of them or all of them?
Yeah, in large part, I addressed them individually, right? As much individually as I could. I explained how, what my reasons were at the time, how even though I really couldn't articulate it as elaborately or as in depth as I can now with greater understanding, right, being 46 versus 23, right? I explained how I was a child, fending for herself, and, the Mr. Hendricks incident was due to the fact that I was hungry, like literally hungry, you know what I mean? It don't justify it. It was just me explaining, like, what led to me, doing it. Then I just explained to Shelley Johnson's family, who was familiar with me, who knew I had lived with her, how I was living the best as I could, in honor of the street code, right? And, despite the fact that her life was, obviously worth way more than, all of that or whatever, all of that, ignorant, limited reason or whatever, right? How at the time, that's what I believed in, right? I explained to Miss Dickey's family how, though my intent wasn't her specifically, right, I was, continuously, perpetuating that lifestyle. And that she happened to be, caught in the middle of, myself and the person who thought they was coming to sell some drugs, right? So the whole situation actually was criminal, right? And in effect, right, depending on what your perspective is, you could say really wasn't too many one's innocence, there or whatever, right? And then I explained to Mr. Booker's family how, although I embraced him as a brother, right, I explained to him at the time he was living in the gated community. His family was living in the gated community, whereas, like I said, I was fresh out of prison and I was homeless. I explained to him long before we got together and joined in our street activities that if he wasn't for real, doing it for similar reasons or whatever, right, that it would have been in his best interest not to deal with me, right? And how it wasn't so much that I said forget them or disregard to them, but that I was serious about the lifestyle, right? Because that's all I had. That's pretty much a summation of what I said, almost to a T, right? So.
Okay. Did they respond in any way, shape, or form? Like, did they say anything back to you?
At the time, so Mr. Booker's family being the last one I had addressed, it came off as cold. I got a very direct nature. I prefer to be direct. And I've oftentimes been misunderstood for that, right? And so the judge had to call a recess because his mom's had stormed out the courtroom, right? Because she had took it as, like I say, being harsh. Whereas years later, his brother had reached out to me, and we were for a period of time writing, corresponding through the prison mail, right? And as he told me, he shared with me how his father was there, and how his father, though he was hurt, understood me and forgave me, right? Being a man, somewhat, in knowledge and experience with that lifestyle, whatever, right? So yeah, it caused a little bit of a disruption. They had to take like a 15, 20-minute recess. But when the court adjourned, the judge, who at the time was known for, coming off pretty harsh himself to individuals he was sentencing, he spoke kind of fair, man. He was like, man, it's pain represented on both sides. It's a lot of pain, in the courtroom, right? So my take on it was that, even though, I was the bad guy in the situation, right, I was still somewhere understood for having, not exactly meant bad, but just meant, to take my life in my own hands, so yeah.
So nowadays, how do you spend your time in prison?
So, like I said, I went straight to Supermax, soon after being sentenced. I went to the Corrections Reception Center, and after 2 days of being a regular population, I was isolated and told that I would be sent to Supermax, becoming the first, prisoner in the state sent straight to Supermax, upon first entering or re-entering the system or whatever, right? And like I said, I had went in, right, with the mindset that I was going to work on myself. I had, before, even before, I got this time, I was starting to recognize a lot of contradictions in the lifestyle, right? Most especially associated with the so-called love and loyalty in the streets, right? And so at the end result of my cases, or the then end result of my cases, it was a lot of stuff that went on behind the scenes, if you will, right, that further emphasized, like, the lifestyle wasn't all what it was cracked up to be. And so it affected me to the point of my going into isolation. I told myself that I was going to come out better than what I was going in, as. And one of the elements or aspects to my coming out better was I was going to make sure that I came out with no lasting illusions about, life, myself, and things of that nature. So I took to studying, I took to, writing and things of that nature, which in and of itself, contributed to a healing process. But a lot of my experiences, the lessons from them had caught up with me because, like I say, I was in isolation. And I ultimately did 8.5 years in that setting, in that same institution, right? So I was afforded a lot of time to face and deal with myself. A lot of healing, I took to a lot of healing, man, a lot of growing, right? A lot of growing in my understanding. And so I had remembered people encouraging me to write my story, that I had a story, that I had something within my story that could be shared with others. And so I started writing my book, man, reliving and then writing my story. And by the time that 8.5 years was up, I had went from one book to quite a few, and I had programs, and I had came to the conclusion all around that I really did or do have something in me that's worthy of being administered to others for the sake of helping them not make the same choices that I made. So my commitment all this time, 20-some years later, has been to my continued growth and development, but also to the sense of purpose of, administering to others, man, utilizing the lessons from my experiences to help others in their dysfunction and their ignorance, most especially with identifying, with that lifestyle and, with harming others or whatever, so that's what been keeping me focused, man. That's been my driving force, 100%, right? So, and that's what I stand on today.
So where do you think you went wrong in life? Like, why do you think you went down the path that you did? So, I don't mean to sound,
for this to come off as, you know, callous or whatever, but I don't believe I went wrong because, okay, you can say in believing in people, right, and believing in that lifestyle, right, but that's what I was fed before I was even taught that you can be anything you want to be in life. You can grow to be the president if you wanted to dream and things of that nature. I was literally told since as early as I can remember that because I'm black, you know, the world was going to be against me, the system was going to be against me. I was told that I had to be cold-blooded. I was told that I had to be raw, and that's what I was. I was told these things literally before I was taught how to read, before I was taught a lot of things that I recognize as being normal today. That was my normal, right, that dysfunction and that ignorance. And so I don't feel I was wrong for believing in that because I had no reference. You know what I'm saying? I'm saying I was a child. That was the only experiences I had to look at. So when I got a little older and people was telling me, you know, different things like I can be more and do more, it was confusing because it's like, hold on, wait a minute. My grandmother told me this, you know what I mean? My aunt, you know, some of my uncles and, you know, some of the people I was exposed to that was adults told me this, that, you know what I mean? And so I will be wrong so where I was wrong at, right, is when I start seeing different. I start seeing the contradictions, but I stayed with that lifestyle. But by that time, I started recognizing that I was of an age where just changing wasn't going to be an overnight process. It wasn't going to be something that I can just, especially being caught up in a lifestyle that had momentum to it, right? That had a pace to it or whatever that I couldn't really free myself from, you know. And so I was incarcerated, man, long before I came to physical prison, right? And that's what I was incarcerated in, right? And so where did I go wrong at? It's for me, it's genuinely hard to say, man, because I only believed in what I was given. You know what I mean? You know, and even, you know, hurting people, right? It was like, I'm pretty sure you can imagine a person bracing for impact, knowing they about to, you know, be hit with something or run into something or whatever, right? My brace for impact came from people telling me what I was going to go through. You're going to be dead or you're going to see prison before you turn this age, right? But also at the same time, while waiting on it, I'm trying to counter, you know, the whole impact itself. I'm trying to protect myself, you know what I mean, with the best, you know, methods or functions that I knew, you know, that was inspired in me, right? So it's to say it bluntly, man, it's a fucked up reality, right? But that's really what it consisted of. I didn't choose, you know, by nature to get up and go hurt people. I didn't even want to, you know what I mean? Like, for example, when I was out there selling dope, I'm seeing my mother in crack houses. And now here it is, I'm supposed to sell this and almost basically appreciate making a living off of somebody else's misery. I couldn't, right? I didn't want to because my mother wasn't present in my life. One reason being the drugs, right? And so I understood that I was able to, you know, make that connection, right? And so here it is. I was out here, you know, selling this stuff or whatever to provide for myself in place of nobody else showing up for me, right? Nobody, right? And it's like I say, man, it's a fucked up reality, man. It's a contradicting cycle, man. It's a cold cycle, man. And you know, unfortunately, through it, you know, I had to learn my humanity, right? I had to learn the things to be able to even articulate this reality, and it's, you know, so I don't know, man. It's hard to say where I went wrong at for me, man. I would be wrong if I would continue to perpetuate the same value system, you know, the same outlook on life, the same disposition. You know what I mean? Which I don't. I don't encourage it. I don't believe in it. I don't identify with it in no way, shape, form, or fashion. You know, so.
Right. Well, that's good. That's good. That's good that you can see that, you know, kind of like breaking the cycle of sorts. So I was just Googling your name, right, and something popped up on TikTok, and it says Legends of the Street, and it has your name on there. It says you were a hitman / gangster. Is there any truth to you being a hitman for the Crips?
So it's that 60-second thing came. I'm about to call you back real quick.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Sounds good.
No, so I was chuckling a little bit, man, because out of all, because it's quite a few. It's you know, I heard about the ones on TikTok. You got quite a few of them on YouTube, right? For years, man, I've been communicating how I totally dislike, you know, the image of perpetuating, you know, my past deeds or whatever, because I don't see them the same way, you know, quite a few others see them or whatever. There is no glorification in no 151-year sentence, right? There's nothing to celebrate. That's a tragedy within itself, right? It was interesting that you saw that, right, that you would bring it up now or whatever, right? I'm like, man, out of all this, but no, man, the truth in the matter, right, is that, like a lot of young people, right, I had a lot of pain in me, right, a lot of hurt, a lot of self-hate, right, and a lot of confusion, and, you know, so when I got involved in the gang life initially, I was looking for that family, right? And I did receive love and loyalty from quite a few individuals, right? But at the same time, when it turned into the actual violent part, right, it gave, how can I say this? It gave room or lane for expression of all that hurt and pain in me. I read an article written on me one time where a judge had quoted, or a judge is quoted as saying, hurt people, right? And that's so true, because I did do a lot of things in the name of, you know, my gang life, right? I hurt a lot of people, right? Because I was hurt. And, you know, that the gang itself gave me, the gang culture gave opportunity, for lack of better words, right, for me to express that hurt, right? At the same time, you know, I wasn't no hitman for the neighborhood I come from or nothing like that or whatever, right? That's just, you know, they do associate my name with the street legend thing, right? Since I was a kid, I've heard that, but I've never once before, even to this day, ever, you know, got the big head, never had the, you know, excitement in my stomach and none of that, right? Because I'm living this life that I'm feeling, you know, most intimately than anybody can, right? More intimately anybody can. Like I say, it's nothing to celebrate, right? And so just what that is, man, is people glorifying, you know, some are just trying to, you know, give a, you know, I believe a fair account, you know, of me having, you know, understanding it from, you know, an inside perspective, I guess you could say. But no, it's a lot of what's this word, man? It's a lot of over exaggeration, right? With you know, people saying I've done more than, you know, than what I've done or whatever, right? So no, that's not true at all. I was very expressive with my gang life or whatever, and I definitely was what could be considered frontline, right? I was, you know, a very hurt young man. So, but no, I wasn't a hitman for the Crips or nothing like that.
So do you get respect in prison then for being like a street legend of sort?
Yeah, I know without a doubt to know. I know that a lot of respect comes from what people hear about me, right? But I don't stand in that image. I spend a lot of time with myself. Like, I genuinely still live as if I'm in Supermax, right? I don't come out the cell too much. I don't do a lot of talking. You know what I mean? When I do, it's to encourage somebody. You know, I don't say nothing unless I have some of substance to say. I don't talk about the past. If I do talk about the past, like I say, it's to draw a lesson from it and to use my having really been there as a platform to reach somebody who's still identifying with it. But no, I don't. To your question, yeah, I do. I know a lot of the respect is associated with, you know, what I'm heard of having done. But and I know that because right now how I live is contrary to where I come from. I live very peaceful. Like, I give a lot of respect. You know what I mean? You know, I have no shame with saying that I follow Christ or going to Bible study no more than I, you know, have shame or don't have shame. A better word, we're praying with somebody or whatever, right? And I mean it. I don't just mean it, you know, for the sake of the image or whatever. But I know that if I didn't have a reputation and didn't move how I move, because I do still carry myself as a man of zero tolerance. I don't take, or give any bullshit, right? But that's because I value respect, and I value my human respect, and I value the human respect of others. I don't care if they black, white, little, straight, gay, whatever, right? I give everybody a respect because I value, when that comes from, a lot of what I've been through, and a lot of what I've done, man, but I don't wear my reputation on my sleeve. I don't try to live through it and things of that nature, like, I've seen others do, you know what I mean? So, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I was just curious about all that because I saw that and I saw it had quite a few views at that too, and I was I'm curious. I've talked to quite a few high profile gang members and leaders, alleged gang leaders, and stuff like that, and I find that lifestyle very interesting. Is there anything that you would like the public to know about yourself or your case?
So if I could use myself as a platform for someone genuinely invested in the reaching of the youth who seeks to have a more in tune understanding of how to reach them, right? As well as just people that, that look out the landscape or whatever their life reality is, and they see, whether it be on the news or passing down the street or whatever, they see young, black males and females, and/or females, right, mired in that lifestyle, right? It's important for them to understand that we too are human, right? And not all of us are engaged in trying to nurture an image or a persona of something that we aren't. Not all of us are, trying to glorify ignorance or dysfunction and things of that nature. Some of us are genuinely, like myself, born to what you call pre-existent conditions and realities where our whole lives, or most of our lives, is in reaction to things that, were set in motion before we even landed on the planet. And a lot of that reaction is inspired by or connected to ignorance, us not knowing that we have more options, that we have more value and worth to it, that life itself has more value and worth to it, right? And, a lot of us only needing to be reached, on the level of our humanity with some understanding that, isn't, framed in, are they crazy or, they bad or, with they damaged goods, right? Because we human beings too, man, working out our lives, right? And so, with that being said, I would just, try to encourage somebody to be just a little bit more patient, a little bit more open-minded, in their approach. Of course, you got to be protected. You got to, everybody's life is on limited time, limited energy or whatever, so I can understand somebody, saying it's only so much I'm willing to take or give or whatever, right? But if you genuinely invested in, reaching somebody in that lifestyle, I used an illustration before, right? So leading up to it, I was reading Khalil Gibran. He said, what penalty laid you upon him who killed in the flesh, who was first killed in his soul, right? What penalty laid you upon him who kills in the flesh, who was first killed in the soul, right? And my interpretation of that, when you think of the soul, you think of the emotions, the visions in the mind, and things of that nature, whatever, right? How you kill somebody's soul in that sense is their ability to dream, right? Their ability to imagine themselves in a better set of circumstances or in a better reality, functioning as a better person, right? When you deprive them of that or you discourage them of that, right, you're killing them in their soul. So when they lash out in the physical, what are they guilty of to a certain extent, right? And an example I use to highlight that sometimes, right, is a mentally handicapped person, right, a disabled person living in a household who has to communicate, say for example, they communicate through sign language, right? So they living in a household where they got their own room. And let's just say for the sake of imagination, their room happens to be on the 3rd floor in the attic, right, where they have a room to themselves and the rest of the family, 2nd floor, 1st floor, right? And in the middle of the night, they find themselves waking up. They wake up to find the house on fire, right? And they want to let their family know that the house on fire, right? We all in danger, right? But they can't scream out, so to speak, to say, hey, the house on fire. They, like I said, handicapped. So what they do, they start knocking shit down in their immediate area, knocking over tables, throwing shit or whatever to try to alert people's attention in the house. Hey, something going on. It's an emergency, right? Although to some may be a simple or shallow analogy, right? The truth in the matter is our lives are structures, our houses themselves, right? Our beings, right? And some of us are trying to alert people that we hurt, that something is going on within us, and we just don't know how to communicate it, right? And so we, being, dysfunctional, if you will, handicapping our communication, even in our understanding of what's going on, our own understanding of what's going on, we do the best we can to draw attention to ourselves. And a lot of that attention is right there, what you see in the crime rate, what you see, in the schools and the communities of all the dysfunction and the violence or whatever, right? So, if I would say anything, it would be to somebody wanting to approach to contribute to some type of remedy, understand what you're approaching, right? I wanted to be saved. I wanted to be, understood. I wanted to be, helped out of my, my prison, if you will, my handicap, right? You know what I mean? But people weren't able to reach me just with telling me, oh, just go to school and just think positive. It's deeper than that when for years of your life, from the time your mind, your brain was even being formed, right? You were told all these things that totally contradict everything they might be telling you in a moment. You know what I mean? Hoping that a moment's conversation, a moment's enlightenment would last a lifetime or would counter what to that point has been a lifetime of all type of other stuff, right? But yeah, man, I'm human too, man, and it's unfortunate that I had to learn my humanity through, harming the humanity of others, right? But I truly believe that God had a purpose for me, because now, I have a platform through which I'm hoping to be able to soon reach, generations of, individuals who come from things like, similar to mine, you know what I mean? And with that being said, if anybody genuinely, invested in doing anything, I have programs and books, and I have genuine interest to work with anybody that's, invested in the regard, so, yeah.
Have you been diagnosed with any type of mental illnesses since getting to prison?
Nope, I haven't even spoken to many people. Even when I was dealing with, depression and stress over the years or whatever, and I tried to reach out to the different departments, man, my reputation has many people very standoffish and, towards me, man, very, it's like I can't hurt or like I can't need help, so I haven't really, nope. I haven't anybody that I know, or they probably wrote something on paper that they believe to be a diagnosis, but I haven't been informed of it.
Before we conclude this interview, is there anything that you'd like to talk about that we haven't covered yet? Not offhand, man, but I will like to say, just use this platform to say, rest in peace to Otto, man. That's who we met. That's the medium through whom we met, man. And I know I never heard, any of y'all conversations, or we didn't even talk about him extensively, right? Like I said, I spent a lot of time to myself, but he did tell me that you were good people and that he was working with you on something, and he did mention podcasts, right? He didn't elaborate as to, what criteria specifically, right? But I thank him for this opportunity, because one thing is that is very important to me is, man, to generate some type of, or contribute to some type of understanding, a degree of understanding between myself
my kind in the general public. And by my kind, I don't necessarily mean blacks. I mean individuals who go through, the type of struggle and, experiences that I've been through, right? And that's, regardless of race or whatever, right? The Otto I got to know, man, is very serious, straight up and down man, right? But at the same time, one of the most silliest, laughter-provoking, individuals that I've had the privilege of meeting and opening up to over the years, man. And when he passed recently here, man, it hit home, man, because, having the type of time that I have, right? And then having no illusions about reality, nor being, the type of person that's, eager to evade reality, right? I don't do too much putting cushions between me and my reality, right? It hit home like, damn, man, it's a possibility, that could be me, transcending life from in here or whatever, right? But also, too, man, despite, I know he did a lot, man. In his life, man, and I don't know what the causes, to his choices were. We never got to talking about those type of things, right? I know he deserved more, man. When I say I don't care what nobody say, that's not the victims' families because they have a right to feel and say what they. But in terms of the world, man, what constitutes being the world, man, I believe that he deserved more than, having to see his last, bit of life, man, from in here, man. And I wish his family the best, just as well as I wish healing and recovery as much as possible to all those affected by, the not so good expressions of Otto, right? But like us all, like every other person on the planet, man, there's more than one part, more than one expression, more than one way in to everybody, right? And he had more than just, whatever the world saw, whatever, And I just want to pay homage to that, man. And and I pray that his soul is, somewhere at peace and resting, and those that he affected, that their souls just as well are at peace and are resting, in God's good grace, Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It was real interesting because he was supposed to call me the Friday I got back from my trip that I was on, and we were working on disclosing victims' names and stuff to law enforcement. Well, not I shouldn't say victims' names, but victims, like cold cases were being solved with a friend of mine who I do lives with, and I did lives with her and Otto and another lady too, and he was in the process of helping solve cold cases, so hopefully they can solve all those other ones so all these families can have, closure after, decades of not knowing what happened to their loved ones,
So he was actually helped. So yeah, that speaks volumes right there. That take a lot of growth, man. That take a lot right there. So
yeah. He said he didn't care about the families and this and that, but I think deep down he did. I think he was just playing the big macho,
serial. Yeah, he did a lot of that. Yep. Yeah, he did a lot of that.
Yeah, but it was thank you for taking the time today to do this. I appreciate it. I know it's not easy making yourself vulnerable and talking about your past, especially your criminal activity and what led you to be so incarcerated, so I really appreciate it.
Anytime, man. Anytime.
That was my interview with Prentiss PJ Williams. If you liked the episode, head on over to patreon.com/unforbiddentruth to listen to it ad-free, along with every other episode that has been published. I have a tier on Patreon, which includes having access to legal documents, scans, from different cases throughout the United States, which have been sent to me personally. Thank you for listening. See you on the next one.